So in order to answer more of these questions, we are currently conducting extensive interviews with people who knew Rash Baktiar and who have heard of him during his time. Something else that we have to be mindful of was the importance and the prominence of the Internal Security Department during that tumultuous period of time in Singapore's history. Rash Baktiar probably had to be very tactful in the way he was trying to empower the Malay people. Or not. Questions of whether what he was doing was unlawful or dangerous remained to be answered. So apart from trying to understand Rash Baktiar, his personality, his characteristics, and his beliefs, which is a massive project in itself, we also have to know and try to understand what is his position in history. What kind of change did he enact? And what was his role in it? He's a man that has been left out of history textbooks and cultural museums. Was this something that was deliberate, unfortunate, or inconsequential? Given the precarious and often undervalued status of Malays in today's society, in addition to their inability to integrate with the greater population of Singapore, we strongly believe that this is an important project to embark on. The Siapa Laku organization is currently embarking on second phase of our project, where we begin analysis of our research materials. From phase 1 of our project, we have come to realize and understand the interdisciplinary nature of our project. There's the historical bit, the philosophical bit, the cultural bit, the anthropological bit, and so on. As a result, we have recruited experts from these respective fields. We have combed through our networks and contacts, read through vast amounts of research papers and publications. And this is how we found Professor Ma, whose research expertise greatly complements ours. As a result, we have started working together.
Dr. Ma di Mama, most often referred to as Professor Ma, was born in 1955 in AN province. He grew up in the nearby maternal town of Gadan, where the painter Cezanne spent a little more than a year in 1885, a period of his career during which he is said to have initiated the shift from factual to conceptual representation and invented the Saint Victor. This decisive turning point in the body of work, generally regarded as holding the origins of Cubism, and with it, modern art eventually became Malais. The study of this shift in visual perception and representation was followed by a research on the evolution of the sense of narrative in European society, induced by the transition from French to English garden in the 18th century. This was in turn followed by a study of the role of the dual icons of Saint Constantine and Saint Helen in the fire-walking ceremony of the Anastenaria community in Greece. From there on, his work became increasingly concerned with ethnological studies, eventually leading to the creation of the Department of Comparative Visual Anthropology in the University of Cantor.
Okay, thank you, Zaki. Good evening, everybody. Yes, I'm Professor Ma, and I'm coming here to follow up on the work of the Siapa Laku organization. As the movie explained in the beginning, the founding member and his assistant are not here in Singapore today, and that's why they asked me if I could come here and talk live with you tonight. As it so happened that I was conducting further research in the neighboring island of Bintan. It was a great pleasure for me to answer their call. So I'm here to talk about the second phase of the Siapa Laku organization research. The first one was about understanding, discovering, laying out the work of Rash Baktiar work in the 1970s. And now the association has embarked on that program to see how much of that change that Baktiar brought to the perception of the Malay identity, how much of that can be further pushed in what we know of it. Now, the reason why I joined the association is because I was right away fascinated, when they contacted me to join them, I was right away fascinated by what Baktiar had done. You heard a little bit in the introduction of what I do, the kind of work I do. I'm basically very interested in conceptual shift of perception. My first study was in that shift of perception that Cézanne implemented when he started representing the concept of a scenery instead of representing the factual representation of it. And this was started as part of a research in art history, and somehow things led me to develop that approach to anthropology. Now, this is exactly what Baktiar had done. Malay identity is bogged with a whole lot of preconceived ideas. What Baktiar did was to take those preconceived ideas and simply turn them around, and turn the failure into a pride. How this happened over all those few years, we've seen, we've heard quite a lot about it. Now, this was something which was really fascinating to me, and that's why I decided to answer the call to join this organization. When that happened, I had basically no idea about Malay history or culture. Most of my researches had been conducted in Europe, in the West. So the first thing I did when I started working with it was to embark on a study of Malay history and Malay world. So I started with something, you know, the usual historical research, going through book, learning about the history of this part of the world. And I came across things such as the name, some great empires, such as the empire of Srivijaya, which is said to have laid down the basis of the Malay culture from the 7th to the 11th century, an empire that was based in Sumatra, in what is today Palembang. And then that was followed by another splendid empire, which was the Empire of Malacca, which started in the late 14th century, and throughout the 15th century controlled basically the trade of Asia with Europe. Now, those two empires, somehow, throughout everything that I was reading, everything that I could learn about the topic of Malay identity, there was one thing that was really standing prominently, and that was the language. The language was the one thing that was uniting all those very diverse, all those very blurry identity that came all along the story together. Now, the history of the Malay language has been reconstituted by linguists. There are a few diverse theories about it. The main one is the Bellwood-Blust synthesis. Now, what the Bellwood-Blust synthesis says is that the Malay language is part of the Austronesian family of languages, which started in Taiwan, from where there were two directions of migration, one going towards the Pacific, and across the islands of the Pacific there are a whole lot of tribes speaking languages from the Austronesian family, and another one went south throughout the Filipino archipelago. From there, these people carried on the migration and went through Borneo all the way to the south coast of Borneo. It is said that it's in the riverine system of the south coast of Borneo that the Malay language started really taking shape. From there, the migration continued to cross the Java Sea to go onto Sumatra. There in Sumatra, things started taking even more, they became even more concretized, and from there they went on finally onto the peninsula. The last wave of migration of these people went across the Indian Ocean, all the way to Madagascar and West Africa, which makes today the Austronesian family of language the family of language which is the most widely spoken geographically across the world, since it stretches from West Africa to Polynesia. Now, this language had one major literary work, which is the Sejarah Melayu. It is widely acknowledged as being the founding element of Malay literature. It's the one book that contains all the stories that are going to lead to the development of the Malay culture in Malacca, 15th century. Now, what, again, with my concern for looking for shift in conceptual perception of the world, what really fascinated me in the Sejarah Melayu is a story which is found in the beginning of the book, because most of the book is actually concerned with the history of Malacca, but prior to that there's a few chapters which are about what happens before Malacca. Now, in those chapters, there is one chapter which is about the story of a heavenly prince sent from heaven to lead the Malay world. Some sort of a figure that announces Rash Baktiar way back in time. Now, the story of Sang Nila Utama starts, he is said to appear on Bukit Siguntang in Srivijaya, which is today, it's been acknowledged as being Palembang. Now, Sri Tribana wants to found a new kingdom, a kingdom that is really going to lead the whole Malay world. So what he does is he leaves with his boat and he goes all the way to the island of Bintan. There, he is acknowledged as the king of the Malay world by the queen of Bintan. The story goes on that he crosses the straits from Bintan to Temasek, and this is where the famous story of the mare lion takes place. And 1 century, his descendant carries on and moves on to Malacca to found Malacca. So this is the story of Sang Nila Utama that takes place basically from the late 13th century all the way to the late 14th century with the founding of Malacca. This is obviously a very elated, semi-mythical stories. 1 century later, Thomas Spear, a Portuguese apothecary, after the capture of Malacca by the Portuguese, collected information from local people, and he came up with the story of another guy called Parameswara. Now, the story of Parameswara is strangely very similar to that of Sang Nila Utama. It starts again in Palembang, but instead of being an elated king moving away to found a new wonderful kingdom, he's chased by the Javanese because he refuses the suzerainty of Sabah. He goes on again to Bintan, where he makes friends with the Orang Laut there. He crosses the straits to Singapore, where he kills the king of Singapore, becomes king for a few years before being chased by the Thai, because the king was a suzerain of the Thai, and then he's chased again on the peninsula, where he did found Malacca again. So we have those two stories, which are completely similar, but one which is a probable fiction, wonderful probable fiction, another one which is reality and carrying on with all the elements in it, and those two stories superimpose each other in space with 1 century apart. And that confusion is today very clearly expressed in the grave of Iskandar Shah in the nearby hill just behind here, where Iskandar Shah is conceived as an elated king, which in fact combines those two identities. So here we had a story that was bringing with it a whole lot of those differences in perception that I was interested in. Incidentally, the crossing of that strait between Bintan to Singapore was also marking a very important cultural, historical shift. It was the shift from Srivijaya to Malacca. The shift from the Hindu-Buddhist culture to the Muslim culture. It was the shift going from the world of all those islands of what is today Indonesia all the way onto mainland Asia. It was a decisive shift across a fault line separating the two islands, which incidentally again runs very deep in history, because it's precisely the fault line that the Dutch and the British chose as a separation between their respective sphere of influences, and it's again the same fault line that ran between the emergent independent nations. So there was something going on between those two islands, there was something going on along in that straits that was very much concerning my type of research. So I decided to go on the other side. Since my research has started in Singapore with Rash Baktiar, I decided to go on the other side of the strait. I decided to go to Bintan and the little island of Penyangat, where it is said that there was, in the 19th century, a whole movement which was known as the Malay Renaissance. Now, what I discovered when studying the history of Penyangat is that there was a very important character called Raja Haji Ali, a man of learning, a writer, who wrote some of the earliest book in Malay literature, including the Tufat al-Nafis and the Gurinam Dua Blas. But for what concerns us most today, he most importantly wrote in 1851 the first monolingual Malay grammar. This was the first grammar written by a Malay, in Malay, for the Malays. Until then, the only Malay grammars had been written by Westerners in order for visitors to be able to speak with the native. This was the first grammar in which the Malay identity was becoming self-reflective. That was the first time that there was that kind of shift of consciousness whereby the Malay could actually speak about themselves and analyze themselves. So I said, definitely there is something for me there to investigate. And thus I chose to actually go physically in Bintan to carry on my research. Okay, so what happened when I went there? At first I came across the standard vision of the Malay culture, the very elaborate, glamorous, a lot of frills and a lot of beautiful colors and all that agitation, visual agitation. But I could feel that this was not exactly what I was looking for. What I was looking for, I eventually discovered it on the roads of Bintan. There are very few roads on Bintan. In fact, the roads in Bintan were only built in the 20th century by the Japanese during the Second World War. That was the first road built on Bintan. So it's something very new in the landscape there. But it's nonetheless today something which is really most important in the economy of the country. And on the roads of Bintan, there's a whole lot of motorbikes traveling. Now, what I discovered is that there was something linked to those motorbikes, which is a phenomenon which is called the Nyemak. Now, what is the Nyemak? We'll come to a linguistic analysis of that term later on. Most of the people here, even the Malay native speaker, will probably they won't be very sure of what it is about, because it's a word which apparently doesn't exist in the normal Malay language. So, what is the Nyemak? Basically, the normal motorbikes look like this. Many motorbikes on Bintan are like this. Now, what is happening? Why are people there taking away those rear mirrors? There was something on the visual point of view which was really intriguing to me. Now, if you think carefully about it, the rear mirror is a very, very strange and actually complex invention. Technically very simple, conceptually very complex. Because a rear mirror is something that you use to look back in order to anticipate what's going to happen ahead. It's something that places you in the relation to time and space in a way that was really demarking a drastic shift in human visual perception. So, the Malays in Bintan simply cannot do with that back and forth between back and front. What they want is to be able to move ahead. What they want is an open field ahead of them in order to just move without thinking. Now, what made me realize that this was not just the case of just a few isolated individuals was, you see that little thing here? This is actually a little gadget that people use to screw so that the whole of the mirror is still protected. It meant that there were enough people on Bintan doing that for somebody to turn it into a business. Somebody had thought of producing those little gadgets in order to make the motorbike still look good. Because this is very important in the Malays, that idea of something that looks good. So, those motorbikes with no rear mirror, this is what, in fact, this is what they create in the visual perception of the world. The Nyemak is actually something, it's the Nyemak described that sensation that the rear mirror creates. It describes a sensation by which the rear mirror is creating a vision which is unnecessarily filling up the space and making it too busy. This is what the world looks like with two rear mirrors, and this is what it looks like with no rear mirrors. You have to admit that it's all so much simpler and so much easier to negotiate. There's no need to look back, you just need to look ahead. You just need to be in the now. There's no back and forth, only the now counts and matters. Okay, on the linguistic, just a little touch on the linguistic point of view, because the word doesn't exist in the normal language. So I asked a few friends of mine, Indonesian, and so we came up to that conclusion. I mean, it's nothing written in stone yet, but it would seem to be the probable origin of the word. It would come from the word semak semak, which means bushes. Now, what does a bush mean in a tropical perception of the world? It's actually a low vegetation obstructing the way in the jungle. It's annoying and obstructive. And from there came the adjective, Nyemak, annoying, obstructive, unnecessarily filling up the space and making it too busy. So, that perception of the world which just doesn't want to bother itself with too many things, which just want to be in the now, just be simple and take things as they are. I don't know if the same thing happened to you when I described the whole event to you, but it has something very clearly that relates to some other elements. This is what the rear mirror creates. A world too filled up with information, which are just too difficult to negotiate. This is what the world without a rear mirror creates. A world where everything is cleared and clean. A world where everything is now, in the present. This, when I put all those elements together, I could hardly think that it was not exactly what Rash Baktiar was aiming for. Something that was turning the whole thing upside down and clearing all the doubts, clearing all the questions and taking things for what they were in the now. And this somehow is strangely relating to Zen. It's something that somehow the connection between the two is like so deeply engraved and so meaningful that it just couldn't be ignored. Now, when I made that connection between the Nyemak and Zen, it suddenly dawned on me that it was connecting me back to something I had read at the very beginning of my research. And that was relating to some Zen element. It was relating to the Lankavatara Sutra. Now, what is the Lankavatara Sutra? It's a very important sutra in the history of Buddhism, because it's a sutra in which you find the first mention of the word Malaya. And it's a sutra which was handed by Bodhidharma to his disciple Wike, and it's the sutra upon which was developed the Chan philosophy, school of philosophy in China, which eventually became the Zen philosophy in Japan. Now, that sutra in which you find that mention of the word Malaya in the introduction has a history which was mostly documented and studied by the Dr. Sukuki, who published in 1930 a very in-depth research, and he translated the whole sutra in Japanese, both Japanese and English. Now, what Sukuki says about the Lankavatara Sutra, and particularly about that, because this is what really concerns us today, is that introduction of the Lankavatara Sutra that bears that mention of Mount Malaya. What he says is that the introductory chapter, which appears in all Lankavatara texts except Gunabhadra, the earliest Chinese version now extant, is no doubt a later addition and does not properly belong to the main text. But as it almost gives a summary, if any such thing is possible of the Lankavatara, I have decided to incorporate its translation in this book. So, the introduction to the sutra, which bears the name Mount Malaya, is apparently not original to the sutra. The sutra is said, the original sutra is said to have been a text given by Buddha to his disciple in the way back in history. Now, there are 4 translations. There were 4 early translations in Chinese of that sutra. The first one around 420 by Dharma Raksha, and that translation is lost. The second one, which was done by Gunabhadra, which is a translation that was handed by Bodhidharma to his disciple, was done in 443. And Dr. Suzuki mentions that that translation doesn't bear the name Malaya. The 513 translation by Bodhi-Ray does bear that mention of the Mount Malaya. The 4th translation is 704. So the translation that would for the first time present that name Malaya is 513. Now, if we look at what is generally acknowledged as being the first apparition of the name Malayu in history, it appears, according to Leonard Hantaya, a prominent historian specialist of the Malay world, it appears between 607 and 610 in the itinerary of a Chinese emissary. So that mention of the name Malaya in the Lankavatara Sutra is at least 1 century older than the one done by the Chinese emissary. So what does all this means? Well, it means that there would appear to be a very interesting connection for some reason. There would appear to be a very interesting connection between the Malayu identity way back in time and the Zen philosophy of today. If we look at the world and the presence of what the Malayu world did, the Lankavatara Sutra is said to, it's generally accepted that the Lanka island upon which the whole thing takes place is Sri Lanka. Now, Sri Lanka is just a short distance across the sea from that region here. You see that isthmus here, which is apparently where the very beginning of the Malay trading linking India and China took place. probably in the very first centuries of the Common Era, as far back as 2nd, 3rd, 4th century of the Common Era. So we have that connection here at the beginning. Now, the trip of Bodhidharma to China, which is that bringing of that Mahayana philosophy to China, which is going to lead to the Zen Buddhism, is said to have taken place across the Silk Road, through the North Route. Okay? Now, that route was also used repeatedly later on by other Chinese monks going to India, searching for the sacred text in India. But eventually all this took shape in China and led to that development of Zen Buddhism, which went into Japan. Now, if we take what happened a little later around the zone here in Sumatra, we were talking about Srivijaya in Sumatra. By the 6th, 7th century, a new development of Malay culture took place in Sumatra, which was making again that whole connection with China and India. And across that whole region, Srivijaya developed as a very reputed place of learning in Mahayana studies. If we add to that whole construction the story of the monk Atisha, who came from Bengal, South India to Bengal, and went to Srivijaya to study for about 15 years, and then later on went back to Bengal, where he was called upon by the king of Tibet to regenerate Tibetan Buddhism with what he had learned in Sumatra. There seemed to be an obvious connection between what I would call a Malayu Mahayana, which is somehow not so distant from what Rash Baktiar was trying to develop. That attitude whereby you have to reverse your whole thinking to reach that now position and open onto the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ma. It's question and answer or Q&A. So anyone who wishes to question or to ask Professor Ma, please do so. The floor is yours.
Would it doubt me? There isn't one single bit, and I can swear it, there isn't one single bit in everything I said that is not true. Everything that I said can be traced back in the books. There isn't one single bit. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I know it sounds like, but it's a fascinating thing is that it's really fitting, that whole controversy around Rash Baktiar. It really fits what Rash Baktiar was trying to create, that reawakening of a different, turning that perception of things around and turning it in order to really actually move forward. Nyemak. Let's clear all any doubts and let's just move on. Dr. Rubin Ashim and Vanessa, I think they are coming back in 2 weeks from now, I hope. I think they are coming back in 2 weeks. I mean, the research they've done over there are really groundbreaking. I think they are going to come up with something really major.
How widespread is Rash?
Well, I mean that's what the whole research. I mean, the research started in the beginning because there was actually no traces of it. Somehow it had completely. It's again a question of like it had completely disappeared. We are now in the process of really trying to bring back all that development forward. So it's. I mean, there's still a long way to go. I mean, there's still a lot of research to complete. But I'm glad to see so many people here tonight. It means that the whole idea is beginning to have some I mean, people are beginning to grasp the importance of that concept. So, yeah. Nyemak. I'm sorry, in Bintan it's Nyemak.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Nyemak. Well, I'm in the process of writing a paper on this on that theme, which I hope to publish in the journal Anthropological Studies of the University. So, I mean, it isn't like a big research as such. It's still focusing on a very specific, concrete aspect, but which I think it's something that says a lot about that perception, the change of perception that can happen, the way things turn around. It's a very specific, concrete aspect, which I think can probably, hopefully, lead to wider investigation. It's not something as simple as saying, oh, Malais are all Malais. It's something that you have to accept, that you carry with you anyway. It's something that we have to accept that we carry with us anyway. We all carry failure with us, somehow. To which extent you accept to identify with it and turn this failure into a success, this is where the Malais identity can bring something to everybody. I think you deserve. Can I? Where are the? I mean, you experience exactly what I mean. I think. Do we have the? Zaki, do we have the? Are they outside? We have something. I have something for you right now. No, because I think that what you experienced just now is exactly what we mean.
The failure to understand.
The failure to understand, which is the fact that you actually did understand.
No, I don't understand.
Exactly. Because you don't understand, because you failed to understand, you did understand what we were trying to do.
I think it is also
Are there any more questions? If not,
and this is where we are in the midst of Zen philosophy.
okay, any more questions? If not,
no, because I would like to give the certificate to this gentleman, because I think he really actually deserves that certificate of honorary Malayuness. I mean, for a brief 5 seconds, he actually was.
Professor, they will get it when they.
Oh, on the way out.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
So I think we've come to the end of the. Oh, there's one more question.
Dr. Rash Baktiar's last speeches were interesting, and I think he was mentioning that I think about perseverance. Do you think
Okay, I'm not in a position to comment, okay, on that kind of topic. But, okay, just as a hint, we do think that the reason why such a groundbreaking major movement disappeared completely so much out of the landscape has something to do with it, yes. But this is something that we still need to investigate. So we cannot. I mean, okay, this is okay. Maybe I said too much already. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Professor Ma. Thank you, Rubin Ashin. Thank you, audience. Please look forward to the next. next lecture, which is by Siti Saleha Umar. Title is Reinventing Exam, Sit, Listen and Do, which will be 9 June, Thursday, same time, 8 p.m. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.